Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome back. Today we're diving into the United States Agency for International Development, better known as USAID. We'll be going over its history and impact on global development, and also the debate surrounding its future, a debate that's been stirred up lately with figures like Elon Musk chiming in.
Yeah, it's certainly a compelling intersection point, the world of high technology and these really complex issues of international aid. To really understand the current debate, I think we need to look back at USAID's history. Its roots are in the Cold War. So USAID was established in 1961, and it was initially designed to be a tool of U.S. foreign policy. The objective was to counter the spread of Soviet influence.
And those early years were about showcasing the advantages of democratic capitalism over communism, of course. USAID had three main objectives back then: promoting economic development in developing countries, providing humanitarian assistance when needed, and then lastly, furthering U.S. foreign policy goals. Many of the early projects focus on really tangible improvements to standards of living, things like agriculture, education, public health infrastructure.
Exactly. They were trying to create a network of alliances,
Yeah.
to showcase a development model that was aligned with U.S. interests. But this approach wasn't without its problems. Working in diverse cultural and political landscapes meant they had to navigate the difficulties of collaborating with local governments and organizations. And there were inherent tensions there, the desire to help, but also the potential for imposing Western models on sovereign nations.
Then the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s changed everything. It dramatically shifted the global landscape, and it forced USA to really reconsider its mission. As this bipolar world declined, the agency started to change its focus.
Yes, the emphasis moved away from countering communism and towards tackling these broader global challenges. Poverty, environmental degradation, and governance deficits became the new targets, and this shift led to a greater focus on sustainable development and building capacity within recipient nations to allow them to manage their own progress.
And this wasn't just about external goals. It also involved some internal reflection. USAID was criticized for being inefficient and lacking accountability. This led to efforts to streamline operations, to make things more transparent, and to modernize management practices. The goal was to make sure resources were being used responsibly and effectively.
Along with those internal reforms, USAID expanded its partnerships too. Collaboration with international organizations, local NGOs, even private sector entities became more and more important. And this let them use a broader range of resources, expertise, and perspectives, so their interventions could be more adaptable and innovative.
To really grasp USAID's path, we need to look at the theoretical frameworks that have shaped its development philosophies. Early initiatives were really influenced by realism, reflecting that Cold War context. The focus was on national interest and geopolitical strategy.
As the world changed, liberal internationalism started playing a bigger role. This emphasized economic interdependence, promoting democratic values as ways to achieve stability and development. But there were other influences as well. Modernization theory, with its emphasis on replicating Western practices and institutions, also had a significant impact on early programs.
That theory in particular attracted a fair bit of criticism, because it often ignored local, cultural, and social contexts. So people questioned its long-term effectiveness and sustainability. The idea was that developing nations could quickly modernize by adopting Western practices and institutions. But this approach often overlooked local, cultural, and social contexts, and this led to questions about its long-term effectiveness and sustainability.
Then dependency theory came about as an alternative viewpoint. This argued that some aid practices, instead of creating self-sufficiency, actually made countries dependent, and that this hindered real development. This critique led to debates about the balance between providing assistance and giving nations the power to chart their own development paths.
And more recently, USAID has been embracing the sustainable development paradigm. This approach stresses environmental stewardship, social inclusion, and economic resilience as these interconnected pillars of progress. It recognizes that development has to be holistic. It can't just be about economic growth. It has to include social equity and environmental sustainability as well.
Now let's take a look at the tangible impact of USAID's work across different sectors and regions. In the area of global health, the agency has been key in disease prevention and control. Their programs targeting HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis have done a lot to reduce the burden of disease. And they've achieved this through various interventions: vaccination drives, setting up health clinics, and training local healthcare workers.
USAID's investments in maternal and child health have also produced some pretty impressive results. By concentrating on things like nutrition, prenatal care, and immunization campaigns, they've managed to decrease maternal and infant mortality rates in many areas. These efforts really emphasize their dedication to tackling health challenges across different stages of life.
Beyond health, USAID has also been heavily involved in education and building capacity. By building schools and training educators, they've expanded access to quality education, especially in underserved areas. They've also put in place vocational training programs meant to enhance the skills of local workforces and boost employment, so contributing to economic development and self-reliance.
And when it comes to agriculture and food security, USAID has brought in modern farming techniques, like irrigation systems and strategies for diversifying crops. These interventions have really helped to strengthen food security in areas that are vulnerable, and they've also stimulated local economies. We can't forget either the vital role USAID has played in providing emergency food aid during times of crisis. This has prevented famines and helped stabilize communities dealing with severe food shortages.
Disaster relief and responding to emergencies have always been at the heart of what USAID does. They're known for acting quickly when natural disasters and conflicts occur, providing basic necessities, food, water, shelter, and medical aid to those affected. And they don't just stop there. They also focus on building long-term resilience in communities that are prone to disasters, helping them to get ready for and lessen the impact of future emergencies.
It's really important to understand that USAID does more than just humanitarian aid. It's also a powerful tool for U.S. foreign policy. They leverage their development work to advance bigger strategic goals. In many ways, USAID has acted as a form of soft power diplomacy.
Exactly. It's about promoting those democratic values, supporting civil society, and creating opportunities for cultural and educational exchanges worldwide. And these efforts have really boosted global goodwill towards the U.S., strengthening its image as a world leader.
USAID's investments have also played a part in building stronger strategic alliances. By working with key nations on development projects, they've created closer ties and aligned those countries more closely with U.S. interests. Often these partnerships extend beyond just development work. They also include diplomatic and security collaborations. This shows how USAID can contribute to stability in regions and security worldwide.
And we shouldn't forget about the economic side of USAID's work either. By helping to stabilize and develop emerging economies, the agency has indirectly created conditions that can be good for U.S. businesses, and that can expand global markets. These efforts help build a more interconnected world economy, and they also make the U.S. more credible in international negotiations and policymaking.
Now, despite all of its successes, USAID has also faced constant criticism, especially about how efficiently it operates. One common criticism focuses on the agency's bureaucratic structure. Critics say that its complex organization leads to delays, inflated overheads, and inefficient use of resources. There are also concerns about accountability and transparency within the agency. Some people are calling for greater oversight to make sure that the money is being used well and responsibly.
Another criticism is aimed at USAID's tendency to use standardized development models. Critics argue that using the same approach everywhere doesn't account for the unique cultural, social, and economic situations in different regions. This can result in programs that are a bad fit for local needs, and that can actually be harmful. The debate about whether USAID creates dependency instead of true self-sufficiency is still going on. This raises questions about whether some development programs are actually sustainable in the long run.
The close relationship between USAID and U.S. foreign policy objectives has also been questioned. Some critics are worried that the agency's program sometimes put strategic or political interests ahead of what the communities they are supposed to be helping actually need. This raises questions about the balance between USAID's development mission and its role in advancing U.S. foreign policy goals.
To really get a sense of the nuances of USAID's work, it's helpful to look at case studies. These can show us both the successes and the shortcomings. In global health, for instance, targeted programs in regions struggling with diseases have made a real difference in improving local healthcare systems. USAID efforts have brought about improvements in vaccine distribution, the availability of healthcare services, and the capabilities of local healthcare workers. These positive results really underline the impact of continuous investment in global health initiatives, especially when they're implemented in close collaboration with local governments.
But USAID's work in agricultural development in sub-Saharan Africa paints a bit of a mixed picture. While some areas have seen bigger crop yields and better integration into the market thanks to USAID's help, others have struggled with infrastructure problems and resistance to practices that were brought in from outside. These different outcomes highlight how important it is to tailor development strategies to the specific context of each place, and to make sure that communities are consulted so that programs really address their unique needs and priorities.
In a similar way, projects focused on strengthening governance and institution building have had complex and sometimes conflicting results. In some places, there have been gains in transparency and public administration. But in others, there's been friction between Western models of governance and traditional political systems. These experiences really emphasize the need for a careful and culturally sensitive approach when trying to reform institutions. They show that imposing solutions from outside won't always work or be effective.
So now we come to an interesting turning point in USAID's journey. Elon Musk's very public statements calling for the agency to be shut down have had a big impact on the current debate about its future. To really grasp the significance of this argument, we need to look at what led Musk to this position. His interest in cryptocurrencies like Dogecoin, and his belief that technology can be used to make aid distribution more efficient and direct.
Musk's proposal to shut down USA is connected to a number of political and economic factors that have been developing for a while now. A key factor is the ongoing criticism of how much USAID costs to run and how bureaucratic it is. Musk and others who share his view say that the resources going to USAID could be used much more efficiently through innovative technology-driven models that bypass all that bureaucracy.
And this argument really taps into that populist idea that we've seen more and more. That idea that we should prioritize spending here at home instead of on foreign aid. There are some political figures who see USAID as this relic of the Cold War. And they say we should just take its funding and redirect it to programs here in the U.S. This viewpoint often goes hand in hand with a general distrust of government programs and a belief that the private sector can always do things better.
The rise of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology has only strengthened the belief that market-based private sector solutions are the way to go when it comes to international development. People who support this view think that in the future, aid will be delivered directly to those who need it through these decentralized platforms, cutting out the middleman, bypassing what they see as the inefficiencies and political agendas of traditional government agencies like USA.
And of course, we can't forget about how the media and online discussions have shaped how the public sees this whole debate. The media often goes for sensationalism and simplifies things too much. So the issue ends up being presented as a black and white choice, outdated bureaucracy versus exciting new innovation. And this often means that people don't see the full picture, the complex role that USAID plays around the world and what the consequences of shutting it down would actually be.
Social media has added to the problem. It's created this fragmented and often very emotional conversation where well-informed analysis gets mixed up with claims that haven't been checked. So the debate gets tangled up with people's ideologies, and it becomes difficult for the public to really understand how effective USAID is and whether the proposed reforms are a good idea or not.
It's crucial that we think about what shutting down USAID would really mean for the world, both in terms of development and the influence of the U.S. abroad. If we were to suddenly get rid of the agency, it would most likely cause major disruptions in important areas like health, education, and agriculture, especially in regions that heavily depend on USAID's help.
Yeah, that kind of move could undo years of progress in things like reducing poverty, controlling diseases, and improving education. And it could actually make existing problems worse and destabilize regions that are already fragile. Not only that, but losing USAID would also significantly weaken U.S. soft power and its diplomatic leverage. USAID has been a key tool for U.S. foreign policy. It's helped to create goodwill and build important alliances all over the world. If it's gone, there will be a gap in leadership in the development arena, and other nations or organizations might step in to fill that gap, and they might reshape global development priorities in ways that don't align with U.S. interests.
Elon Musk's call to shut down USAID has certainly stirred up a lot of discussion. But it's really important to remember that it's the U.S. government that ultimately gets to decide, not individuals. It's the executive branch and Congress that have the power to determine how federal agencies are structured and funded. Any major change to USAID would have to go through legislative action. So, while past administrations have thought about cutting or reforming the agency, USAID's future ultimately depends on what policymakers and elected officials decide.
Instead of just getting rid of USAID altogether, I think a more practical and less risky way forward is to focus on specific reforms that address the agency's weaknesses but keep its essential functions. One area for reform is streamlining how the agency works, making it more efficient so we can reduce administrative overhead, make people more accountable, and make the agency more responsive. This might involve things like combining overlapping functions, strengthening oversight mechanisms, and adopting management practices that are more flexible.
Another really important area for reform is making sure that programs are adapted to local contexts and that community-driven approaches are prioritized. This means moving away from those one-size-fits-all development models and instead putting more effort into understanding the specific needs of each place, working hand in hand with local governments and organizations, and giving communities the power to take charge of their own development projects.
Embracing technological advances is also essential if we want to modernize USAID and make it more effective. This means looking at how we can use digital platforms and data analysis to make program management more transparent, to track progress better, and to make sure that aid gets to the people it's meant for. We could also look into hybrid funding models that combine public and private partnerships and innovative ways of raising funds. This could help USAID diversify its funding sources and be less reliant on traditional bureaucratic channels.
At the end of the day, USAID's future depends on finding that balance between concerns about spending at home and the fact that international development is still vital for U.S. foreign policy. We need ongoing evaluation and flexible management practices to make sure that USAID stays relevant and that it's actually effective in a world that's constantly changing. As we wrap up our deep dive into USAID, we're left with this question. How can we make sure that international aid programs, whether they're run by government agencies like USAID or through other models, are truly effective, accountable, and able to adapt to the ever-changing needs of the global community?
This is a really complex question. It makes us think about the political, economic, and ethical sides of international development. And it's a question that each of us as global citizens has to wrestle with as we try to find our way in an increasingly interconnected world.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.